David was sitting at home one day, once again thinking about how lucky he was. Well, lucky, not really, because the job was temporary, and the woman on the other end of the phone kept reminding him of that. But for David, it was enough time to calmly find something more permanent. He liked working at the hospital, but it was tough to tolerate that arrogant department head. How could anyone stay indifferent when the guy demanded to save money on everything, even bandages, reusing them several times? That was just beyond reasonable. When the boss suggested reusing bandages, David couldn't hold back anymore. He didn't stay silent and told the boss exactly what he thought of him. Naturally, a complaint followed against him. But that complaint didn't go beyond the chief doctor. And that was the end of it. The next day, as expected, David was fired. Well, no big deal, he had only worked there for 6 months and was already getting in someone's way. Of course, he felt uneasy, especially since he had just rented an apartment, and this was a real blow. Meanwhile, the phone in his pocket vibrated. "Hello, David? It's me again, Julia. I just wanted to warn you that my father has some strange moments. Well, let's say, sometimes he has these spells and starts talking nonsense, mentioning a son or wife he doesn't have. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen occasionally. So just be prepared." "Understood, Julia," David replied. "I'll try not to take it too seriously." He hung up and, reflecting, realized that this woman had repeated the same thing to him 3 times in one day. Well, he thought, maybe she's just worried. After all, her father was dying, and she was powerless to change it. David sighed and decided to tidy up his home since stressful days lay ahead. The job with Julia's father would begin the next day. Alex, that was the old man's name, didn't say anything particularly unusual at first. He lay quietly, taking vitamins and other supportive medications. David wasn't sure what exactly the old man was suffering from, but Julia had said, his body is just tired of life. That didn't sound very convincing, but who knew? However, on the second day, something strange happened. The old man suddenly spoke. "Were you sent to poison me?" David almost laughed. "Poison you? No, I'm only giving you what's prescribed, mostly vitamins." Alex smirked. "Sometimes, I'm even proud of Julia. She's really good at manipulating people." That ended the conversation. The old man fell asleep, but David couldn't get his words out of his mind. Poison? What nonsense was that? On the third day, they talked a little about life, and suddenly, David found himself thinking that Alex didn't seem mentally ill. The man was too coherent, which confused David even more. From time to time, the old man sank into depression, but his mind remained sharp. Something was off, but what? David decided to keep observing. On one of his days off, he studied medical books, hoping to find something similar to Alex's condition, but he found nothing. He was especially troubled by the fact that each time after his days off, the old man seemed to get noticeably worse, even though he had been stable before. David felt helpless, but a thought began to take root in his mind. What if something was really happening when he wasn't around? The next day, David returned to Alex. The old man looked even worse than before David's day off. Something's definitely wrong here, he thought, and then he decided to ask directly. "Alex, what's going on with you? Why do you get worse when I'm not here? You understand that I don't get it. I'm applying to medical school and have studied many diseases, but I haven't found anything like your condition." Alex smiled sadly. "If I tell you, you won't believe me." David squinted and leaned in closer to Alex. "Come on, try me. Tell me, maybe I will." The old man sighed heavily and began. "Julia isn't my biological daughter. She's the daughter of my second wife, Christina. That's where it all began. I left my first family once, my wife and son. I acted like a real scoundrel. Christina was young, beautiful, and I made the biggest mistake of my life. She gave birth to Julia, but as I later discovered, she was only interested in my money. Things went wrong from the very start, but I didn't realize it then. Alex paused for a moment as if gathering his thoughts, then continued. For years, I didn't have any contact with my first family. And when I finally started looking for them, Julia found out. That's when the strange things began. I got sick. At first, I didn't understand what was happening until one day I accidentally saw Christina putting something in my tea. That's when everything became clear. Christina left for a vacation, and Julia stayed to take care of me. Since then, I've been slowly wasting away. Julia is poisoning me, David, and she's doing it in such a way that no one suspects a thing. David leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he had just heard. What a story, he thought. If this was true, the situation was worse than he could have imagined. But if the old man was right, what should he do next? You're telling me that Julia has been slowly killing you this whole time? Alex nodded, his face growing even paler. Yes. And she's doing it so that no one notices. You see, all the documents already claim that I'm not in my right mind. They've declared me incompetent. That means when I die, no one will investigate. Julia will inherit everything. David narrowed his eyes. This sounded like a real conspiracy. But as fantastic as it seemed, strange things happen in life. And the old man was speaking with such conviction. David decided to test his words. What do I do? How can I help you? Alex spoke with new energy. I have papers. They contain all the information about my first family and a will I wrote for them. Julia knows nothing about it. Take the key, it's under the rug by my bed. There's a drawer with the documents. Take them home, look at them yourself. I trust you. If you find them, give them to my family, even after I'm gone. David felt a tremor in his hands, but didn't show it. He carefully took the key and promised Alex he would investigate. After the old man fell asleep, David began to act. He found the documents Alex had mentioned. There really was a will and some papers related to his search for his first family. He took them with him and decided to take one more step. He installed a hidden camera in Alex's room. Something told him this would help clarify things. The next day, David came to work as usual. But when he connected his phone to the camera, he saw something shocking. Julia appeared in the room, followed by a man. He approached Alex and gave him an injection, then began talking with Julia. It was a doctor, or so it seemed to David. They spoke as if this was routine for them. David couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Julia pull out a syringe and give another injection. But the most shocking thing was when she dropped an ampoule and struggled to find it. David zoomed in on the image and saw the name of a drug on the ampoule that slowly paralyzed nerve endings. He stared at the image and realized, that's what's poisoning the old man. The drug leaves the body without a trace, so nothing would be found in an autopsy. David slowly put away his phone and made a decision. In that moment, everything clicked. He knew he had to go to the police. When David returned to work the next day, everything seemed normal. Alex was tossing and turning in bed, and Julia was fussing around him. But now David knew what she was doing. Hang in there, Alex, he whispered. This will be over soon. David waited for the right moment and called the police, hoping everything would work out. He couldn't take any risks, knowing that if he made a mistake, the chance to save the old man would be lost. The police arrived quickly and quietly. David met them and led them straight to Alex's room. Julia didn't even have time to realize what was happening. She stood by the bed with a strange expression on her face as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Everything happened so fast that Alex didn't even understand that his daughter was being arrested. He opened his eyes and saw Julia, red with anger, in handcuffs. Next to her was the man, the doctor, who had been helping her. He didn't escape the handcuffs either. Kevin, what's going on? Alex asked weakly, looking around, trying to understand what had just happened. But David didn't leave him in suspense. It's okay, Alex. No one's going to poison you anymore. "We've got them," he said, pointing to Julia and her accomplice. The old man let out a deep sigh of relief, and just then, another woman entered the room. She cautiously approached Alex. Many years had passed, but her gaze was as kind as ever. Alex recognized her immediately. "Susan?" he whispered, barely holding back tears. It was his first wife, the one he had left for his foolish mistake. He wept openly, his emotions overwhelming him as he saw her again after so many years. Susan didn't say a word, just sat next to him and took his hand. And standing beside her was their son, now a grown man, with a proud smile on his face. "Well, father," he said with a grin. "Hello." Alex wept again, this time with joy. Because despite everything that had happened, he had found his family again. Alex couldn't stop crying, holding the hands of Susan and his son, whom he hadn't seen in years. It was a storm of emotions, relief, regret, and happiness all mixed together. All this time, he had thought he would die alone, slowly fading under Julia's care, and now, his first family was there with him. John, his son, leaned closer to his father and said, "Don't worry, Dad, everything's going to be fine. We're taking you to a clinic now for a checkup. I'll do my best to get you back on your feet." Alex still couldn't believe what was happening. He could barely look at his son, and with a trembling voice, he said, "Forgive me. Forgive me for everything I did back then. I was a fool. I left you for money, for nothing." John smiled and shook his head. "You know, Dad, all this time I thought I'd be happy if I could prove that I was better, more successful than you. But now I realize that none of that matters. It would have been better if you'd been healthy and with us all along." Alex squeezed his hand, and at that moment, he realized that the most important thing in life wasn't money or fame, but the people who had always been by his side despite his mistakes. Meanwhile, David stood in the corner of the room, watching this touching scene. He had never thought he'd find himself in a situation where the simple desire to help someone would lead to the reunion of a family. It all seemed incredible to him, like a scene from a movie, but as they say, life is often more surprising than fiction. As John helped Alex onto the stretcher to take him to the clinic, he looked at David. "Thank you," he said. "If it weren't for you, we never would have learned the truth, and maybe we never would have reunited with our father." "No problem," David replied, shrugging modestly. "Honestly, I thought stories like this only happened in movies. But it turns out, they happen in real life too." John chuckled. "Movies, you know, are often based on real life. So, are you out of a job now?" David nodded. "Yeah. I quit recently, couldn't get along with my boss. They wanted us to reuse bandages." John shook his head. "Wow, strange practices at your place. But you know what? At our clinic, we need people like you. Come by tomorrow, I'll find a spot for you. I'm sure we'll work well together." The car with Alex and his family drove away, and David stood alone, watching as it disappeared into the distance. He smiled, realizing that sometimes fate hands you unexpected gifts. Not only had he saved a man's life, but he'd also found a decent job, one he hadn't even dreamed of. That's how life can change. In just a few days, you can go from being an unemployed nurse to a hero and even get the chance to start all over again. Apologies for any mistakes in the text or narration. This story was created and narrated with the help of artificial intelligence, as our team doesn't fully master the language yet, but we're learning actively. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to not miss out on new exciting stories. We care about your opinion, leave comments and share your thoughts.